In 2004, I was a satellite data analyst at the Fort Wainwright military base in Alaska. My job was to find anomalies in vast, uninhabited territories. And one day, I found something that cost 6 soldiers their lives. That's all that remains in the official reports. The rest is buried in classified files and in my memory. It all began on Tuesday, February 17th. I started a standard 12-hour shift in the analysis center, a windowless room, dimly lit by dozens of monitors, with a constant hum of cooling systems. My task was a routine scan of Sector Bravo, 7 in the Brooks Range, an area of several hundred square miles. It was routine. I was comparing new satellite images with archival data from the previous 24 hours, looking for any changes. Usually it was signs of avalanches, new crevasses and glaciers, or occasionally traces of poacher activity. That day, the automatic comparison system flagged one of the sectors, a low-contrast change in the terrain. At first glance, it was nothing special, but when I zoomed in, I saw them. On the perfectly flat, untouched snow cover of a valley, there were 3 perfectly round holes. Each was about 15 feet in diameter. They weren't positioned randomly, but formed a near-perfect equilateral triangle with sides of about 100 yards. The snow at the edges wasn't collapsed or disturbed, but looked as if it had been cut by a giant drill bit. There were no tracks of vehicles leading to or from the holes. No tracks of humans or large animals. Just 3 black chasms in the perfect whiteness. I switched to the thermal spectrum. Data from the infrared satellite showed another strange thing. The temperature inside the holes was several degrees warmer than the surrounding snow. Not by much, but enough for the system to register it. The snow should have been colder, especially at the bottom, in the shade. But it was warmer. I reported the find to my immediate superior, Major Jensen. He walked over to my workstation, bringing the smell of cheap coffee and exhaustion with him. Jensen, a short, stocky man in his 40s, stared at the screen for a long time, frowning. "Meteorites?" he asked. It was the first logical assumption. "No, sir," I replied. "The edges are too clean. No impact crater, no scattered debris, and the thermal signature doesn't match. The residual heat from atmospheric entry will be much stronger. Sinkholes? Meltwater under the snow?" He was running through the options. Possible, but the shape is troubling. The geometry is too perfect for a natural process. And again, the heat signature. Groundwater will be colder. Jensen rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Request a drone flyover. I need low-altitude imagery. I want to look inside those holes." 3 hours later, we received data from a Predator drone launched from a nearby airfield. It made several passes over the valley at an altitude of 500 feet. The image quality was superb, and what we saw at the bottom of the holes erased all rational explanations. In each of the 3 holes lay skeletons. Judging by their size and characteristic antlers, they were moose. 2 skeletons in the first hole, 3 in the second, and another 2 in the third. And they were just that, skeletons, almost completely stripped of flesh. There were no traces of blood on the snow-white bottom of the pits, not a scrap of hide or meat. The bones were intact, with one exception. On several skulls, the antlers were broken off at the very base, as if snapped off with incredible force. Around the holes, there were still no tracks. No paw prints from bears or a wolf pack. Nothing. It was as if the animals had been lifted into the air, gnawed to the bone, and carefully dropped into these holes. Jensen stared silently at the magnified images. His face grew hard. This was no longer a geological anomaly. It had become a security issue. The unexplained death of large animals in controlled territory was serious. "Did anyone do a helicopter call out there?" he asked the empty room. I checked the flight logs. "No registered activity in this sector for the last 72 hours, sir. Neither military nor civilian. Poachers, they would have taken the meat, or at least the trophies. The antlers, here it's just bones. Bare bones." The major nodded, making a decision. "All right, prepare a full data package for Colonel Davis. All images, thermal maps, drone logs. It looks like we'll have to send people in." Colonel Davis was the complete opposite of Jensen. Tall, lean, with cold gray eyes and a reputation for not tolerating ambiguity. The briefing took place in his office the next day. I presented the facts concisely and dryly, showing the images and data on a large screen. Davis listened in silence, without interrupting, his fingers laced together on his desk. When I finished, he stared at the image of the skeletons for a few seconds. 6 men, he said finally, not asking but stating, reconnaissance team, equipment for extreme low-temperature operations, full communications package. Mission, reach the site, assess the situation, collect samples if possible, and report back. No freelancing. Strictly by the book. He turned to Jensen. Who's our best for this kind of job? Captain Miller, sir. Alpha team. They have the most experience with winter operations in the mountains. Get me Miller. I want them ready to deploy in 24 hours. I knew Captain John Miller. Not well, but we had crossed paths a few times on the job. He was one of those officers who inspired immediate trust. A calm, rational, and physically imposing man in his 30s. He didn't ask unnecessary questions. That evening, he came to the analysis center to study the materials himself. With him was his sergeant, a big man named Riley. Miller studied the images for a long time, asking me to zoom in on different areas. No drag marks, he asked, pointing to the edge of one of the holes. You're sure? Absolutely, Captain. The snow is untouched. The resolution is good enough to spot a rabbit track. There's nothing here. What about the depth? Based on shadows and laser scanning from the drone, about 20 feet, give or take a foot. Riley, who had been standing silently behind him, grunted. To dig a hole like that in frozen ground and snow, you'd need an excavator, and more than an hour of work. And an excavator would have left tracks, Sergeant, Miller replied calmly. He looked at me again. All right, we understand. The mission is clear. We go and take a look. The next day, Thursday, February 19th, Alpha Team was ready. 6 men in full Arctic gear. They were delivered by a Chinook helicopter to a drop-off point about 5 miles east of the valley with the holes. They didn't fly any closer to avoid disturbing potential evidence or scaring off whoever or whatever did this. The plan was simple. The team would travel by snowmobile to the location, set up a temporary camp at a safe distance, conduct reconnaissance, and transmit data. They were allotted 48 hours. I sat at my post, tracking their progress via GPS markers on the map. Communication was through a secure and stable satellite channel. The first few hours were normal. Miller checked in every 30 minutes to report their status. Base, this is Alpha 1. Proceeding en route. Visibility is excellent. Temperature is -22. All normal. Their markers on the map slowly crept across the white space, approaching the red circles I had used to mark the holes. I drank my now cold coffee and felt a tension building inside me. It was irrational. I had seen dozens of strange things on images before, but this situation was different. It was wrong on some fundamental level. About 4 hours after deployment, Miller came on the radio again. Base, this is Alpha 1. We are on site. We have a visual on the first anomaly. Distance 200 yards. Holding position to observe. Roger, Alpha 1. Report what you see. There was a silence on the line for a few seconds, broken only by light static. Then Miller's voice came through again, quieter this time, with a note of restrained amazement. Base, it looks exactly like your pictures, even stranger up close. The edges are perfectly smooth, like someone just cut a piece out of landscape. No movement, no tracks. Another pause. I saw Jensen, who was standing behind me, lean closer to the speaker. Captain, what are you seeing? He asked. We're scanning the perimeter with binoculars. All clear. Wait a second. The silence stretched on. I stared at the stationary dots of their GPS trackers on the map. They were holding their position. Base. Miller's voice was tense. Mark, there's something else here. Something we couldn't see in the drone footage. Under the thin layer of fresh snow, it looks like furrows, deep pressed into the hard-packed snow. They lead from hole to hole, as if something very heavy and Wide was dragged across the ground from one hole to another. Captain Miller's words about the furrows changed everything. Until that moment, we were dealing with a static, albeit inexplicable, scene. Now, there was a vector, a direction, a hint of a process. Major Jensen, standing behind me, straightened up. His voice over the intercom was sharp and clear. Alpha 1, clarify furrows. Described them. The sound of wind came through the speakers, then Miller's voice. These aren't tread marks. The surface is smooth concave, about 10 feet wide, a foot or two deep, maybe more. It's pressed right through the hard top layer of snow and into the soil. Like a giant sled runner was dragged from one hole to the next. But there's no sign of a towing vehicle, no tracks in front of the furrow. They were hidden by the fresh snow, I said, already pulling up the weather report on my screen. That's right. There was a light snowfall last night. An inch, no more. It covered them up. You couldn't see it from the satellite. We only noticed them when we got up close. The light is hitting at an angle and creating faint shadows. This was logical, and it only made things worse. It meant that whatever left these furrows was active here before the last snowfall, maybe 12, 20 hours ago. Colonel Davis, who had been listening to the entire transmission from his office, came on the line. His voice was devoid of any emotion. Captain Miller, proceed with the plan. Examine the first hole up close. 2 men on overwatch, the rest on inspection. Maximum caution. Report every step. Roger that, Colonel, Miller replied. For the next half hour, a tense silence fell over the analysis center. We only heard fragments of commands Miller gave his men, the sound of the wind, and the crackle of the radio. On my monitor, I watched as 4 GPS markers detached from the other 2 and slowly moved towards the first red circle on my map. 2 remained in place, providing cover from a vantage point on a small ridge. It was a standard, well-rehearsed procedure, but this time it felt ominous. Finally, Miller came back on the radio. His breathing was heavy, but his voice remained steady. Base, we're at the edge. My God. He cut himself off. Report, Captain. Immediately, Davis responded. It doesn't look like it was dug. It's fused. The snow and ice around the perimeter have turned into a smooth, glassy crust. It goes deep. No marks from shovels, drills, nothing mechanical. The ground under the snow is also fused. It's black and hard as rock. We tried to take a sample. A knife won't even scratch it. A pause. We could hear one of the soldiers say something quietly to Miller. We're lowering the camera on a line, the captain continued. We want a closer look at the bones. On my monitor, there was nothing but the map and telemetry data. The entire picture of what was happening was being painted by the voice in the speaker. I felt like a blind operator guiding a surgeon through a complex operation. Okay, camera's on the bottom. I'm describing what I see. Moose skeletons. 2 of them confirmed. Completely clean. Not a single scratch on the bones. No teeth marks. They're smooth. Almost too smooth, like they've been polished. Riley says it's impossible. Predators usually leave dozens of marks. Here, there are none. Jensen looked at me. I shrugged. I had no explanation. What about the antlers? I asked, remembering the details from the drone images. Yeah, you were right. They're broken off, but the break, it doesn't look like a break. It's smooth, rounded, as if the bone in that spot softened like wax, and they were just twisted off. Miller fell silent, and a new sound came over the comms. The clicking of a dosimeter. Radiation levels are normal. No background, he reported after half a minute. That ruled out another theory, an unknown nuclear heat source. There's something else, Miller added. On some of the bones, mainly the ribs and vertebrae, there are dark spots. They look like hardened resin or bitumen. The substance is black, viscous looking. We're taking a sample. Very carefully. After getting clearance from Davis, Alpha Team moved towards the second hole. Following the wide, smooth furrow pressed into the snow, the distance between the holes was about 100 yards. Their markers on my map crawled agonizingly slowly. The journey took them almost 15 minutes. They moved cautiously, constantly scanning their surroundings. The landscape was absolutely static. A white valley surrounded by dark, rocky peaks. Not a single sound but the wind, not a single movement. "We're at the second hole," Miller reported. Same picture. Fused edges. 3 skeletons at the bottom. All clean, polished. He was about to continue, but Sergeant Riley shouted something to him. The sergeant's voice was distorted by the distance and wind, but there was a clear note of surprise in it. "Base, hold on," Miller said sharply. "We've got another skeleton here. Not a moose." My fingers froze over keyboard. Jensen leaned forward. "Describe it." "Alpha 1. It's a skull, a very large one, and the bones of front paws looks like a grizzly. But that's not the main thing. The main thing is what's lying next to it. Another skull, white, elongated. Riley says he's sure it's the skull of a polar bear." Silence filled the room. I quickly pulled up a habitat map. The nearest polar bear population was on the coast of the Arctic Ocean, more than 400 miles north of here, beyond the entire Brooks Range. A polar bear in this valley was as impossible as a penguin. "Captain, are you certain?" Davis's voice sounded like he was barely holding himself back. "Sergeant Riley is an experienced hunter, sir. He grew up in these parts. He says he can't be mistaken. And this skull, it also has a hole in the back of it. Smooth, fused, just like the moose." The situation was spiraling out of control. This no longer looked like a strange natural phenomenon or the work of deranged poachers. The geography of it broke all logic. Something had killed moose and a grizzly, and then dragged a polar bear here from the coast, hundreds of miles away. Why? The sun was already setting. In Alaska, it gets dark quickly in February. Miller reported that further investigation in the approaching twilight was unsafe. He decided not to approach the third hole until morning, on the colonel's orders. The team was to fall back a mile to the base of the ridge and set up a fortified camp. "Understood," Davis said. "Set up camp, establish a perimeter, constant observation with thermals. Check in every 15 minutes. "Copy that, base. We're moving out." I watched as the 6 dots on my map began their return journey. The tension eased slightly. They were leaving that damn place. As long as they were moving, it felt like everything would be okay. I leaned back in my chair and rubbed my eyes. The sleepless nights and caffeine were taking their toll. Jensen put a hand on my shoulder. "Go get some rest for a couple of hours, Mark. I'll take over. If anything changes, I'll call you." I nodded but didn't move. I couldn't leave. I felt connected to those 6 dots on the screen by an invisible thread. An hour later, Alpha Team was at the campsite. They set up 2 Arctic tents, deployed motion sensors and thermal cameras, aiming them towards a valley. Miller's last report was completely routine. "Base, camp is established, perimeter is set, sensors are active, we're starting shifts. All is well." Then came the hardest part, the waiting. Every 15 minutes, the radio crackled to life, and the duty officer from Miller's team would say the code phrase, "Base, Alpha is all clear." This went on for almost 2 hours. The sky on my monitors, broadcasting from the weather satellite, turned inky black. The temperature dropped to -35. In the valley where the holes were, there wasn't a single light, not a single heat signature, except for the ones coming from the holes themselves. They still glowed faintly in the infrared spectrum. 3 warm eyes in the all-consuming cold. At 22:30 local time, the scheduled check-in didn't happen. The 15-minute interval passed in complete silence. "Alpha 1, this is base. Do you copy?" Jensen called them after a 1-minute delay. Silence. "Alpha 1, respond. This is base. Do you copy?" My heart sank. Jensen was already dialing the colonel's number. At that very moment, the radio exploded with crackle. It wasn't normal static. It was a high-pitched screeching, like someone dragging metal across glass at a monstrous volume. It lasted for 5 seconds and then cut off. And then, in the ensuing silence, we heard a voice. It wasn't Miller. It was one of his soldiers, a young private named Carlson. He was screaming. No, he wasn't screaming in pain. He was screaming a single, Solitary word, choking for air, and in his voice was a kind of animal, primal terror that I had never heard before or since. It's inside. Inside. The connection died completely. On the monitor in front of us, a red message started flashing. Signal lost. All 6 of Alpha Team's GPS markers on the map went dark. Simultaneously, Carlson's scream cut off, replaced by an absolute deafening silence. The red, signal lost message on my monitor pulsed like a wound. The 6 green markers I had been tracking for hours just vanished from the map, not one by one, all at once, as if someone had flipped a switch. For a second, everything in the analysis center froze. Major Jensen, who had been on the phone with the colonel, stood frozen with the receiver to his ear. His face had become a mask. I frantically typed at the keyboard, running every possible comms recovery protocol, cycling through frequencies, trying to catch even a residual signal from the beacons. Nothing. The channel was dead. The airwaves were clean and empty, as if Alpha Team had never existed. Rewind the recording, Jensen barked, slamming the phone down. Last 30 seconds. On the main screen, I brought the audio file up on the main speakers. First, the quiet crackle of static, then Jensen's voice, Alpha 1 respond. And then that sound, the high frequency, piercing screech. I ran a spectral analysis. The peak was narrow, unnaturally stable, with none of the harmonic oscillations typical of mechanical friction or equipment failure. It was a pure, generated tone, yet one that caused a physical discomfort. And then the scream. We listened to it 10 times. It's inside. Inside. What did that mean? Inside the perimeter? Inside the tent? My brain refused to accept the other, more terrifying possibilities. Simultaneous shutdown, I said to Jensen, pointing at the empty map. 6 independent transmitters. That can't be an equipment malfunction. To knock them all out in one instant, you'd need either a targeted electromagnetic pulse of enormous power, or something that physically destroyed all 6 devices in the same second. Both options were monstrous. An EMP would have left a trace our sensors at the base would have detected, but they were silent. The second option meant an attack so swift and all-encompassing that no one even had time to press the push-to-talk button and say anything else. Colonel Davis didn't waste time on meetings. His voice over the loudspeaker was as hard as steel. Everyone, hold your positions. Launch the Global Hawk immediately. I want eyes over that sector. Bravo team, full combat readiness. You launch at first light, not a minute sooner. I will not send men into that darkness. That is an order. It was the only right, though brutal, decision. To send a second team blindly into the polar night to face an unknown force that had annihilated Miller's team in seconds would not be a rescue operation, but a slaughter. But the knowledge that we were abandoning them out there for several hours was almost physically painful. If anyone had survived, they were alone with the frost and with whatever made that screeching sound. The longest hours of my life began. I sat in front of my now useless monitors. The map was empty. A satellite passing over the sector showed the same picture, a calm, snow-covered valley. I zoomed in on Alpha Team's camp. It was visible as a tiny dark spot on the white. No movement, no flashes of gunfire, no signal flares. Nothing. The thermal satellite still showed 3 warm spots from the holes, and a slightly larger, cooling one where the camp was. But there were no individual heat signatures of people. They had simply disappeared from the infrared spectrum. The room was silent, broken only by the hum of servers in the rear, quiet conversations of the technicians. No one looked at each other. Everyone stared at the screens, waiting for a miracle or a death sentence. I replayed Carlson's scream in my head over and over. Inside, the word was seared into my brain. 2.5 hours later, the Global Hawk drone, launched from Elmendorf Air Force Base, reached the designated coordinates. It was flying at an altitude of 40,000 feet, completely unreachable and invisible from the ground. The image from its optics appeared on the main screen. First, a wide shot of the valley, black and white in night vision mode. Everything was in its place. The 3 dark circles of the holes, And there was the camp. Davis ordered the drone operator to descend to the lowest possible altitude and give maximum zoom. The picture trembled, then stabilized. We saw the camp, and everyone in the room caught their breath. The 2 tents were standing, but they had been sliced open, not torn by bear claws or ripped by an explosion, but cut with long, perfectly straight lines, as if by a giant scalpel. One cut went diagonally across an entire tent. Another had opened up the roof like a tin can. Gear was scattered around the tents. Sleeping bags, also neatly sliced open. One of the snowmobiles was cut in half, right down the middle. The metal and plastic of the cut were smooth, but that wasn't the scariest part. The scariest part was what wasn't there. There were no bodies. Not one. There was no blood. On the pristine white snow, which looked almost blinding in night vision, there wasn't a single dark stain. 6 men. A ferocious attack, judging by the state of camp, and not a single drop of blood. "Examine the holes," Colonel Davis ordered, his voice barely a whisper. "Start with the third one, the one they didn't reach." The operator guided the drone's camera to the furthest of the 3 circles. The image zoomed in, peering into the 20-foot darkness. At the bottom, as expected, lay bones, moose skeletons, just as clean and white. But among them was something else, something man-made. It was a standard-issue entrenching tool, part of every soldier's gear. It was bent, not just bent, but curved into a perfect U shape. The handle and the metal spade had been smoothly folded together, as if someone had taken it and effortlessly bent it in half like a piece of soft wire. We were silent. It was a display of power, incredible, focused, and utterly alien. Dawn was breaking in the east. A pale gray line on the horizon promised sunrise. Bravo team was already in the helicopters, awaiting the order to deploy. I continued to scan the image from the drone, switching between optical and thermal modes. I looked again and again at the furrows connecting the holes. And then I saw it. The low morning sun cast long shadows, revealing the slightest irregularities in terrain. And these shadows showed what had been invisible at night. From a triangle formed by the 3 holes, a 4th furrow extended. It didn't lead to a new hole. It went straight north, toward the impassable, glacier-covered peaks of the Central Brooks Range. And this furrow was different. It was fresh. The thin layer of snow that had dusted the other 3 was absent. Its bottom was dark, exposed in the frozen earth. It had been made last night, after Miller's team had set up camp, after the snowfall had stopped. I put the image on the main screen. "Sir," I said to the colonel, "take a look." Davis, Jensen. Everyone in the room stared at the screen. The silence lasted for several seconds. Everyone understood what it meant. The slaughter at the camp wasn't the finale. It was just an episode. Something had come, done its work, and left, and now we had its trail. A fresh trail, leading into the heart of the Alaskan wilderness. The trail leading north became the point of no return. Until that moment, the operation could still be considered a search and rescue with an investigative element. Now, it had turned into a pursuit. Colonel Davis didn't hesitate for a second. Captain Evans, his voice cut through the tense silence in the control center. Bravo team deploys immediately. 2 Chinooks of transport, 1 Apache for air cover. Your mission is twofold. First, conduct a quick but thorough examination of Alpha Team's camp. Look for any leads, any traces, anything the drone missed. Second, follow the new trail. You are our eyes and ears on the ground. Full combat readiness. Bravo Team was the answer to Alpha Team's failure. Instead of 6 men, 12. Instead of light reconnaissance gear, heavy body armor, automatic grenade launchers, and several heavy caliber machine guns. The military logic is simple. If your force proves insufficient, you double it. 40 minutes later, the helicopters were over the valley. I watched the deployment through the camera of the Apache, which was circling at 1,000 feet. 12 figures in white winter camouflage rappelled down ropes and quickly formed a defensive perimeter. Everything happened fast, smoothly, like a training exercise. But this was no exercise. I watched them approach the sliced-up tents and felt an icy chill that had nothing to do with the Alaskan weather. Captain Evans, Bravo's commander, was a different kind of man than Miller. Sharper, more pragmatic, a specialist in assault operations. His voice on the radio was dry and businesslike as he began his report. Base, this is Bravo 1. We are in the camp. The scene matches the drone data. The cuts on the tents and equipment, they're not mechanical. The edges are smooth, slightly melted. The temperature of the metal on the snowmobile's cut is a few degrees above ambient, like it was sliced by something red hot. This confirmed our theory about thermal effects. No blood, no casings, no signs of a struggle. This doesn't look like a fight. It looks like a cleanup. Evans paused for a moment. We could hear him give an order to one of his men. Found something, he continued. On the melted edges of the tent, we found the same black, viscous substance Captain Miller described on the bones. Sample taken. And one more thing. We found Miller's sidearm, his personal Beretta. It was lying in the snow at the entrance to his tent. It hasn't been fired. The slide and barrel, they're twisted into a spiral, like someone took it and wrung it out like a wet towel. I closed my eyes. Another display of power, devoid of any meaning except one, to show the absolute helplessness of man and his technology. The goal wasn't to break the weapon. The goal was to show that it could be broken. The inspection of the camp took no more than 20 minutes. Finding nothing to indicate the fate or location of Alpha Team, Evans was ordered to move on. Moving out north along the trail, he reported, 12 green dots on my map began to move. They move as a single group, spread out in a line on either side of the wide furrow. The Apache flew ahead at an extremely low altitude, its camera scanning the path. The trail was even stranger than it had appeared from the air. Evans described it in real time. The surface of the furrow is hard and slick, like ice. But it's not ice. It's fused earth and rock. It's impossible to walk on. We're moving along the edges. The trail doesn't deviate. It goes in a straight line, over hills, through ravines. It doesn't go around obstacles. I looked at the map and saw it. The line being drawn by Bravo Team's markers was almost perfectly straight. It was heading into the foothills, ignoring the terrain. Whatever this thing was, it didn't walk on the ground. It carved its own path through it. The further they went, the more difficult the landscape became. The open valley gave way to narrow, winding canyons and steep, rocky slopes. It became harder for the helicopters to provide cover. The Chinooks returned to base. Only the Apache remained, but even it had to stay higher to avoid crashing into the cliffs. Bravo Team was plunging deeper and deeper into a wild, unmapped territory. In the control center, the tension was at its peak. We were once again watching moving dots, once again listening to reports, and the sense of deja vu was unbearable. I expanded the map on my monitor, trying to predict where the trail was leading. It was headed toward a massive rock formation that locals call the Devil's Spine, a jumble of black, weathered peaks. It was then that the Apache pilot transmitted, "Base, I have a visual on something. 12 o'clock, ahead on the course. Looks like a cave." The helicopter's camera zoomed in sharply on the sheer face of one of the peaks, at least 300 feet from the base. A dark opening was visible. The entrance to the cave was wide, about 30 feet in diameter and completely inaccessible. No ledges or paths led to it. "Got a heat signature," the pilot added. "Faint heat coming from the cave. It's warmer than the surrounding rock." Everyone looked at me. I checked the satellite data. Yes, there was a tiny, barely perceptible warm spot there that we had previously dismissed as a geological anomaly. Captain Evans, whose team was just coming around another ridge, saw the same thing. "I see the cave, the trail. It leads right to the base of this cliff. And that's it. It ends here." "What do you mean it ends?" Davis asked. "It just stops. The furrow goes right up the vertical wall and disappears. There are no marks on the cliff, no handholds, no scrapes. It's as if whatever was dragging itself along the ground just flew up. It was a dead end, a logical impasse. We had a target, the cave, but no way to reach it. Sending climbers up a 300-foot sheer cliff under potential fire from the cave was madness. Bravo Team dispersed at the base of the cliff, scanning the wall with binoculars. They were looking for any kind of clue, and one of them found it. Base! Evan's voice on the radio trembled for the first time. He tried to hide it, but I heard it. Base. We see something on the cliff, about 50 feet above the ground. Report, Captain. A long pause followed. Evans was obviously adjusting his optics to get a better look. It's an object. Gear. Looks like a helmet. The pause grew even longer, more agonizing. I see a number. It's Private Carlson's helmet. It's impaled on a sharp rock outcropping. Evans swallowed hard. The sound clicked loudly over the comms. Base, it's crushed. A composite Kevlar helmet. It's crushed into a ball, as if someone crumpled it in their fist like a paper cup. Carlson's crushed helmet, impaled on the cliff, wasn't a clue. It was a message, cold, arrogant, and utterly inhuman. A silence fell over the analysis center. So complete, I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Everyone was staring at the magnified image on the main screen. The small, mangled lump of Kevlar that had, only yesterday, protected a young soldier's head. Colonel Davis was the first to react. His face was like a mask carved from stone. He didn't waste time on emotions. He moved to action. Apache pilot. His voice over the loudspeaker was level, but it rang with metal. Do you have the target in sight? That's affirmed, sir, the pilot replied. His call sign was Gunfighter. 1. Cave entrance. I have a clear view. Target is the cave entrance. Use the 30mm cannon. Warning shot. Give me a short burst on the rock face next to the entrance. I want to see a reaction. Copy, base. Commencing attack run. On the monitor broadcasting the Apache's view. The cliff face began to rush closer. The helicopter made a smooth turn, coming in from the side. Bravo team, at the base of the cliff, took cover behind boulders. Fire, Davis commanded. We saw a fiery tracer line erupt from under the helicopter's nose. The 30mm round slammed into the rock a few feet to the right of the cave. Rock splinters flew in all directions. We couldn't hear the sound, but the image was eloquent. It was a show of force. Our force. We were saying, we are here, we see you, and we can reach you. There was no response. The cave entrance remained dark and silent. No movement, no sound but the echo of the shots that must have been thundering through the canyon. Zero reaction. The Apache pilot reported. Target is not displaying hostile activity. Repeat, Davis ordered. This time, directly on target. Short burst, center the entrance. Understood. The helicopter banked again. I watched as the targeting crosshairs on the screen centered on the black void of the cave. My palms were sweating. This was the moment of truth. We were about to kick the hornet's nest, without knowing what kind of hornets lived there. Fire. The fiery dotted line once again stretched from the helicopter to the cliff. This time, it went straight into the darkness of cave. We saw a few flashes deep inside as the shells hit the back wall. And again, nothing. No explosion, no scream, no return fire. Just silence. Base. The pilot's voice was bewildered. Impact confirmed. No effect. At all. What do you mean, no effect? Major Jensen interjected. Sir, I put 24 high-explosive rounds in there. Everything inside should have been turned to dust. But the thermal signature hasn't changed. No new flashes, no smoke. It's like I was shooting into a void. Colonel Davis was silent for a few seconds. I could see him wrestling with a decision. Standard protocols weren't working. The enemy wasn't reacting like any known adversary should. Gunfighter, 1 missile, 1 Hellfire. Same target. This was an escalation. An air-to-ground missile with laser guidance. It was designed to destroy tanks and bunkers. If it didn't work, nothing would. Copy, sir. Acquiring target with laser. The familiar blinking square of the laser designator appeared on the screen, locked onto the cave. Target locked. Cleared to fire. Launch, Davis said. We saw the missile detach from the pylon under the Apache's wing. It left a thin white trail of smoke as it streaked toward the cliff. The flight took only a few seconds. The missile entered the exact center of the cave, and that's when everything changed. At the moment of impact, there was no explosion. Instead, A light erupted from the cave. Not a bright flash, but a dense, thick beam of blackness. I know how that sounds. It's impossible to describe in words. It wasn't darkness. It was a visible, tangible blackness that absorbed the light around it. It shot out of the cave like water from a fire hose and enveloped the Apache. On our monitors, the feed from the helicopter didn't just disappear. The screen filled with that same blackness. All systems transmitting data from the Apache died in a single instant. Telemetry, video, audio, the GPS marker. Everything went dark. Gunfighter 1. Davis shouted into the microphone. Gunfighter 1, report status. There was no answer, but we saw what happened next to the cameras of Bravo team, who were looking up. The helicopter, shrouded in that black cloud, froze in midair. Its rotor stopped, not slowed down, but stopped instantly, as if caught in jelly. And in complete silence, broken only by the shouts of the soldiers on the ground, the Apache began to change. The metal of its fuselage rippled like fabric in the wind. The cockpit glass bulged outward, then was sucked inward. The missile pylons twisted into tight spirals. The tail boom folded in half with a dry, soundless crack that was visible even from a distance. The entire helicopter, a multi-ton war machine of steel and composites, was being crumpled and deformed like a plastic bottle in a giant's hand. It lasted no more than 10 seconds, and then the blackness retracted back into the cave as quickly as it had appeared, and there was nothing left in the sky. The helicopter didn't explode, it didn't fall to the ground, it just vanished, along with the 2 pilots inside. It dissolved into thin air, leaving behind only a few small pieces of debris slowly falling to the snow, too small to be identified. On the ground, it was chaos. We heard Captain Evans' shouts as he tried to restore order. The soldiers of Bravo team, battle-hardened veterans, were screaming in terror. They had just seen the laws of physics raped and discarded. "Base, what the hell was that?" "Base, respond." Evans' voice was breaking. It destroyed the Apache. It just erased it. Colonel Davis stood motionless, staring at the empty screen. His face was ashen. He had lost. We had all lost. We had encountered something for which we had neither the weapons nor the understanding to fight. And in that moment of horror and confusion, I noticed movement on my monitor. On the map, one of the 12 green markers of Bravo team, the one closest to the base of the cliff, began to move. It wasn't moving back towards the rest of the group. It was moving up, straight up the sheer cliff face. Fast, very fast. "Sir," I shouted, "we have movement. One of the men is climbing the cliff." "What the hell?" Evans roared, hearing this over the common channel. "No one is climbing. We're all here, all accounted for." He did a quick roll call. All 12 men responded. They were all at the base of the cliff, but the marker continued to crawl up the screen, approaching the black entrance of the cave. "That's impossible," Jensen whispered. "Then whose beacon is it?" And then I realized it wasn't their beacon. It was one of the 6 beacons from Alpha Team. It had reactivated, and it was moving. Someone or something from Miller's missing team was in there, and it was climbing towards a cave. Or, even more terrifying, it was descending from it towards them. "It's an Alpha Team beacon," I repeated, and my own words sounded like a death sentence in the deafening silence of the analysis center. "The signal belongs to Sergeant Riley. It's active. On the ground." Captain Evans didn't seem to immediately grasp what I'd said. His reality had just been shattered. He had watched a combat helicopter get erased from existence. His mind refused to process new, even more absurd information. "Impossible!" he screamed into the radio, his voice on the verge of hysteria. "Their beacons are dead. We checked the frequencies." "It just turned on, Captain," Colonel Davis replied coldly, taking control of the situation. "And it's moving towards you from above. All units, take positions. Fire to kill on any target descending the cliff." The order was given, but I could see the panic on the faces of the Bravo team soldiers through their helmet cams. They were firing upwards into the darkness. But what were they shooting at? A dot on a map? A ghost? Their fire was wild, frightened. Tracers ricocheted off the cliff. illuminating it for a split second. And in one of those flashes, they saw it. It was a human figure in white winter camouflage. It was descending the perfectly sheer, smooth wall from the cave. It wasn't using ropes or gear. It just moved down, clinging to the rock as if gravity were merely a suggestion. The movements were wrong, jerky, like a puppet's. The figure's head was tilted back at an unnatural angle. It was Sergeant Riley, or rather, what was left of him. "Cease fire," Evans commanded. The soldiers froze. They watched as the body of their comrade from the missing team descended lower and lower. It was so slow, so deliberate, that their terror turned to a stunned numbness. "Base," Evans' voice was now quiet, full of bewilderment. "It's Riley. I can see his face. But he's dead. His eyes are open, but they're glass. And he's covered in that black substance. It's seeping from under his clothes, from his fingers." Riley's figure reached the ledge where Carlson's crushed helmet was impaled. It stopped, tilted its head as if examining it, and then reached out and took the helmet from the rock. We watched this in complete silence through the scope of one of Bravo team snipers. Riley's body held a mangled Kevlar in its hand, and then began to squeeze. We saw its fingers, covered in the black, shimmering ooze, press into the composite material. The helmet, already a crumpled mess, was crushed further, becoming even smaller with a quiet crunch that carried on the freezing air. This broke the stupor. "Fire!" Evans roared. 12 rifles opened up on the figure. This time it wasn't panic, but focused, withering fire. Bullets sparked off the cliff around Riley's body. Several rounds hit their mark. We saw them enter the body, leaving dark holes in the white camouflage. But there was no blood, no reaction. The figure didn't even flinch. It just continued to squeeze the helmet. When the helmet had been compressed into a ball the size of a fist, the figure opened its fingers. The mangled piece of Kevlar fell, clattering against the rocks below. And then, Riley's body pushed off from the wall. It didn't jump. It flew backwards into the darkness of the cave, so fast the cameras barely registered it. It just vanished inside. And in that same instant, all 12 soldiers of Bravo team screamed. Simultaneously. It wasn't a scream of terror or pain. It was a short, sharp cry, like someone who received a sudden blow. And they all fell as one. On my map, all 12 green markers froze. "Bravo won," Davis yelled. "Evans, report." Silence. I switched to the video feeds from their cameras. All 12 screens showed the same thing. Snow, rocks, the boots of fallen comrade in front of them. No one was moving, but they were alive. I could see the data from their biometric sensors. Everyone's heart rate had jumped to 200 beats per minute and was holding there. Their breathing was rapid, shallow. They were paralyzed. "They're alive, sir," I reported, but immobilized. Every last one of them. Something hit them. Not physically. It was an attack on their nervous systems. Instant total paralysis. And then, from the cave, it began to emerge. It looked like nothing on Earth. It had no definite shape. It was a mass of that same black, shimmering substance that had covered Riley's body. It flowed out of the cave like thick oil, shimmering and changing shape. It had no eyes, no limbs, but there was intelligence in its movement. It flowed slowly, smoothly down the sheer cliff face, ignoring gravity. Its surface was as smooth as obsidian, and the stars were reflected in it. It reached the base of the cliff and stopped a few yards from the prone soldiers. The mass began to rise, forming a tall, thin pillar. Then, from the top of this pillar, a tendril extended, reaching for the nearest soldier, Captain Evans. It touched his helmet. At that moment, Evans spoke. His voice was calm, absolutely calm. That was the most terrifying part. "Base," he said. "Do you see it? It's showing me. Don't send any more people. This isn't yours. It never was. This is just a gathering place." Those were his last words. The black substance touched his helmet, and the captain's body began to dissolve. Not burn, not melt. His clothes, his gear, his flesh. Everything turned into the same black liquid and was drawn into the main mass. It happened silently. 5 seconds later, where Captain Evans had been lying, there was only an empty spot in the snow. Then it moved to the next soldier. Colonel Davis watched with a stone face. He picked up the direct line to Air Force Command. "This is Colonel Davis. I am requesting a scorched earth protocol. Coordinates." He read out the numbers from my report. Target: the entire valley. Use maximum yield. Immediately, someone on the other end must have asked a question. "I confirm," Davis said, his voice unwavering. 18 men. Our losses. Execute. He hung up the phone and looked at me. "Shut down all channels, Mark. This operation is over." I complied. The last thing I saw on the screen was the black mass absorbing the third soldier. I pressed a button. The screens went dark. An hour and 20 minutes later, a satellite registered a massive explosion over Sector Bravo 7. It wasn't a nuclear blast. It was something else, a weapon whose existence I hadn't even suspected. Where the valley had been, there was now a perfect circle 2 miles in diameter. The surface inside this circle had been turned into smooth, black glass. The official report stated that 2 Special Forces teams, totaling 18 men, had gone missing during a training exercise in extreme weather conditions. They were presumed dead. No bodies or equipment were ever recovered. I resigned from the armed forces 6 months later, but I kept a copy of that last satellite image. Sometimes I look at that huge black, glassy spot in the middle of the Alaskan wilderness. Everything about it is perfect. The perfectly round edges, the perfectly smooth surface. Everything except for one thing. Right in the center of that circle, at its deepest point, there's a tiny, barely perceptible detail. It's not a crack, not an image defect. It's a furrow thin as a scratch. It starts in the center and leads north, straight through the fused glass, as if something had crawled out of the very epicenter of the blast and simply moved on,